Welcome back to my sewing room. I'm Kelly and you found me here on Pick and Stitches, and today I want to walk you through a bunch of different methods to make half square triangles. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. If you've watched many of my videos, you know that I really like to use triangles on a roll, but there's a lot of other methods out there that you can use to make half square triangles. And so I thought I would just walk you guys through some of them, let you know why it was that I ended up liking these triangles on a roll. Sometimes it can be difficult to justify because it is another consumable in your sewing room, but for me, the accuracy and the speed, I'm kind of a get her done kind of girl. And so I just want to get it on and off the work table and on to my next project. So this helps me do that, but I wanted to show you some other alternatives. If you prefer not to use those half square triangle papers, you can definitely do it without. So let's jump right on in and I'll walk you through all the steps. Okay, so for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use two different colors pens. I'm going to use a red pen and a black pen. The black pen is going to indicate where I'm going to sew, and the red pen is going to indicate where I'm going to cut. So if we're just doing one triangle, we could start with our exact measurement. So all of these have been scaled up or down based on what I needed. So this first one is exactly 4.5. So this is when you need to make just one half square triangle. So what you'll do is go corner to corner with any ruler, and we are going to stitch from that corner to the other corner. Okay, so I'm going to stitch right there on that line. Now once I've stitched that, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch ruler and I'm going to line that up with my stitching, and then I'm going to cut off this segment here. Switched out to this type of friction erasable marker. So then I'm going to cut off where that line is, and this whole section over here is going to be waste. So you might be able to sew that together and make another half square triangle, but this method is really the most effective if you just need to make one. So I'll pop over to the machine and we'll make this one. Okay, so I've stitched right on top of my line, my black line, and I actually loaded black thread in my bobbin and in my top so that it would be really easy to see. So then I'm just going to line up with that line and cut off the rest of this. So that's probably the most waste created of any of these methods. So, and you have to excuse my discard triangles here. So then we would just press that towards the dark side. Okay, so now that's pressed open. We're going to grab our 4.5 because that's what we're aiming for. And I like to line up my diagonal line with that center just to make sure everything looks good. And it does. It looks very good. It's really accurate. But I do find that this is an excessive amount of waste. It creates more scraps. So that's not the way I like to do it if I have to do several. So that's the one triangle method, and then that's the offcut. Okay, so then we've got our next square. So this is going to be the 2 at a time method. So you need to make this one 1/2 inch wider and taller than what you want your final half square triangle to be. So I'm going to draw our cut line from corner to corner first. So that's where we're going to cut after we sew. And you don't actually have to draw this on, but for a beginner, I do suggest kind of starting so you can get all of your ducks in a row. Then you're going to move over to this 1/4 inch line on your ruler, and you're going to draw, you're going to throw your pen, you're going to draw your 1/4 inch line. Okay, so you can do that on both sides. And then we'll take it over to the machine and we're going to stitch on both of the black lines. Okay, so now we've got both of our black lines sewn on there. And again, if you're not new to quilting, you probably could just draw this middle red line and then sew 1/4 inch to either side of it. But I find for beginners, it's better to sew on a line than try to sew 1/4 inch from one. It just lends itself to being more accurate. So now I'm going to line up right down the middle. These both are already sewn, so this doesn't have to be super precise because I've already got that seam placement. And then we're going to take this over to the ironing board and press it. Okay, So now we've got it pressed to the dark side. We've got these little dog ears. We'll just snip those off. And we've got our 2 half square triangles. So then we'll check our measurements, and you can make these a little bit larger. So for this 4.5 inch that we were trying to get as our finished size, we could have started with something a little bit larger than 5 inches. But what I find is that you always have room to trim it up just a hair. And so that's good because your pieces can be really accurate. It's bad because you have extra steps and extra work. So there's just the tiniest bit of a haircut that you would be able to do around both of these. But that's the 2 at a time. And really there's no waste to speak of in that method. Okay, so for our 4 at a time method, we're just going to take our ruler and we're going to draw a line 1/4 inch away from this outside edge. And then we're going to sew all of those outside edges. And my white block is the one that I have cut precisely here. The red block underneath is kind of a rough cut because I knew my seams were going to be what made this shape. And so, as long as I'm on the right spot on my white one and my red one's a little bit bigger. Okay, so we'll throw a couple pins in this and then we'll go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch all 4 sides where this black line is. Okay, so now we've got all 4 sides sewn where we had the black line. We're sewn with our black thread. And now I'm going to set the seams and then cut this apart. I always like to set my seams before I cut. I don't know, it's an old habit. Probably don't have to do it that way. Okay, so now we're going to go from corner to corner, and that is where we're going to cut. And that's what's going to give us our 4 pieces. So I've drawn those on just so you can see them. If you're cutting, then you just line up your ruler and you cut. You don't have to draw them on. I'm walking around the end of my table here for those of you that I make nervous by cutting sideways. Okay. So there's our 4 pieces. Now we're going to take them over to the pressing station and just press them towards the dark. Okay, so now we've got our 4 pieces. We could trim up the dog ears, but I always like to just double check. So for this method, we started off with an 8 1/4 inch square. So it's kind of a large square to start. And what I need is only a 4.5 inch square. So sometimes if you're using these cheat sheets, you end up with a little bit of excess because that's a lot to me to cut off of a fabric and to just have as discard. So for me, this method really doesn't, it just feels like there's a lot of discard in this method as well. Because if I trim this down, let's just see how much I get on 1/4. So we'll say that I'm going to do that times 4. Oopsie. I'm going to be sloppy because I'm not going to use this piece. This was some old broadcloth I had in my stash. I don't even know where it came from, but I was cleaning things out and it needed to go. Okay, so for 1 triangle, that's quite a lot to me to cut off. So that's not really my favorite method either, but it does get you 4 at a time. Most of the time, especially if you're working on a big quilt, you're going to need even more squares than that. And that's where the 8 at a time method comes in. So I cut these to be 10 inches. and I'm going to place them right sides together, just like our other pattern has been. And now I'm going to sew from corner to corner, just like we did for this method, but then I'm also going to sew this way. So I'm going to go 2 directions. Probably need a longer ruler though. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw that red cut line. That's not actually where I'm going to be sewing. It's just where I'm going to be cutting after I've sewn it down. And then next, I'm going to have my 1/4 inch line away. Okay, and then I'll have my cut line, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch on either side of that. Sorry, I'm just rotating it slightly slower. So I'm going to have my second line on the other side. So I'm going to be sewing 4 lines. In this kind of X pattern on my 10-inch square. Now, if you look at the cheat sheet, it actually calls to be a little bit larger. It wants 11 inches. I'm kind of being as frugal as I dare and going just a little bit smaller than that. So this means I don't have as much room to trim down, but it also means that I can use this method on a layer cake if I don't starch. So we'll go over to the machine. We're going to sew all 4 of these black lines all the way across. Okay, so now we've sewn our 4 black lines. So we have our 2 X's kind of pattern. Now we have one more set of cut lines to draw in. So we're going to go straight through these 2 points, actually those 3 points, and we're going to draw it right down that middle, and we're going to do it this way as well. So that's how we're going to get our 8 half square triangles, is because we're going to cut all of those lines. Now these lines are already in the seam allowance, so they're a little less precision needed, but you'll just run your ruler and cut the entire length. And then we'll go this way. So now we have a couple quick cuts. Now you can't stack these and cut them. So you're going to cut each one. And then when you take it over to your pressing station, then you're going to have your 8 half square triangles. And then we will take these and press them, and I'll show you what we have. Okay, so when we finish up our 8 at a time method, we do have to come back and square up our triangles. There's usually the slightest little bit to trim off on all 4 sides. It's not a lot, it's just a trim, but it is something that you need to do to keep all of your blocks square. All right. So we'll roll through and do that on all sides, and then we'll have 8 of these half square triangles. And now I'm going to show you my favorite way to make half square triangles, and that's kind of with this sheet. These are called triangles on a roll, and they have the directions printed exactly on them. You get them from It's So Emma. The Fat Quarter Shop has them. A lot of places carry them. They're my favorite. So just like the other ones, we're going to do right sides together. And then we're going to place our paper over it. And again, this paper says to cut it 10.5 inches wide. I'm kind of living brave here and only doing 10. So I like that the 10.5 has a little less waste, because if we had cut this one to be 11, we would have had to trim quite a lot on all 4 sides. So now I'm going to take this over to the machine, and this shape probably looks very familiar. So we've got the solid line, that's going to be our cut line. All of these dotted lines are these sew lines. So we're going to make the 2 strips, X's, and then we're going to cut on all of these solid lines. So I'll go sew that down on the machine and meet you back here. Okay, so I've sewn down all of my same X pattern that we had before. I just didn't have to draw on any of the lines. And then the first thing I'm going to do is trim up these outer edges. And part of the reason I really love half square triangle paper or triangles on a roll is that you get to do this step now. So you're cutting kind of more than one block trimmed at a time. And then you're still going to have to check them when you're finished. But I find a lot of times if you're really careful on this step that I don't have to trim up every single block on all 4 sides. Now, if you kind of drift and you're not really on the lines and you don't really cut on the lines, then you might still have some problems. But I find that this is the fastest way for me to be as accurate as I can without losing my mind. Now these last cuts are inside the seam allowance, so I don't have to be as precise with them. After I get all those main cuts down, it's where it gets a little bit faster. So now I'm going to cut those 4 apart, and now I'm going to cut these 4. Now it is important to make sure that your triangles are going the same way. You would hate to cut one this way because you would ruin both of them. Well, you'd ruin one of them anyways. 2 of them. Okay. So, and whenever I use triangles on a roll, I do drop my stitch length, because if you drop your stitch length, then your papers come off really easily. So this first one is at a normal stitch length, and I'm kind of having to be a little bit careful with it to make sure all my paper comes off. But that's it. Now one of these others, they just rip right off. I'm not even really having to think about it. But I sewed one pass on purpose with my stitch length at normal, closer to a 2, and this is the other side of that one. So it's just a little bit more time consuming if you don't drop the stitch length, but it's not the end of the world. So then we have our 8, and I'm already out from under the papers, and we're ready. Okay, so then we have our 8 at a time method of triangles as well. So when we come back to check our size, it really doesn't need any trimming at all. So what I'm going to do is just trim off these dog ears. So that is why I love the triangles on a roll, because you don't have to do this step on all 4 sides every single block. And it just saves a ton of time, especially if you're doing a pattern that requires a lot of half square triangles. You do that trimming while the paper's on there and everything stays pretty accurate, and it's just exactly what works for me. So there's definitely, a multitude of ways that you can do it, and what works for me may not work for you. But this is just kind of how I arrived at what I like to do and how I do it, and I thought I would share that with you guys. Okay guys, so really it's pretty straightforward and easy. You need a ruler, you probably need a marking pen of some sort, and you could make the 2 at a time method. There is a fair amount of waste with this one, but if you the 1 at a time method, there is a little bit of waste with this one, but if you only need 1 extra, like say you accidentally mess up something, that never happens to me in my sewing room, and you need to just cut out another 1, then that's perfect. The 2 at a time method works really well, especially if you're working with like charm packs and you've got a 5-inch square and you want to just get 2 out of that 5-inch square. That's perfect, nice and easy. And then this 4 at a time method is not really one that I use very often. It's just a whole lot of trimming, and the waste with this one, it just hasn't been something that I've reached for. I really like the 8 at a time. I tend to do patterns that are quite large, that use a lot of the same repetitive combination of blocks. So making 8 out of the same color wave is just fine. So the 8 at a time method with the triangle on a roll paper certainly has less trimming at the end. As you can see, these, I like walked from the ironing board over here, snipped off the dog ears, and they are all ready to go. I still need to trim up these 8 because they're not quite as square as I would like for them to be. But at the end of the day, it still gets the job done, and then you don't need the consumable. So 100% up to you. I just wanted to kind of walk you through some options. Hint, I'm going to have another project coming up here shortly that's involving a lot of triangles. So I thought a lot of half square triangles. So I thought it would be good to go ahead and do this video, show you guys some options so that when I jump into that quilt, you'll have something to kind of fall back on if you're not a triangles on a roll lover. So I hope that answers some questions. If you enjoy watching any of these tutorials or my unboxing videos, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And until then, guys, I will see you next time.